Hi folks, hope you had a Merry Christmas. Thought I'd do a little follow-up to my previous video about how mindfulness meditation is Buddhist meditation. Because I got a couple of emails following that in which people talked about mindfulness meditation in schools. One guy said, well, 2 minutes of mindfulness meditation in a school for an elementary kid isn't going to cause them to freak out. They don't need a Zen master to do that. And one person even told me a story about how he was an elementary school teacher and he successfully lobbied not to have a mindfulness thing going on in his classroom for the reasons that I kind of laid out in the last video. And I felt a little bad about that. Not saying that the guy was wrong, but that that's kind of sad that they did that. And truth be told, I don't think a couple of minutes of mindfulness meditation is going to really cause a kid to freak out and need help from a Zen master or anything like that. So I guess there's a limit. But I still stick with the point that what we're teaching when we teach mindfulness meditation, these people teaching mindfulness meditation and trying to make a secular sort of mindfulness, I think there's a problem with that, and I think it's also dishonest to say that it's not Buddhism, because it is Buddhism. So I don't, and as I said in the last video, I don't know a good solution to that, and maybe people are working on the solution to that outside of me and getting and coming up with something. I don't know. But I'd like to kind of talk about, I said that Buddhism is a meditation program with 2,500 years of research and development behind it. And I'd like to talk about some of the things that Buddhists do to bolster meditation practice, or to hold it up, to create a support system for meditation practice. One of the basic problems that we are facing in the West is that we have a strong separation between religion and everything else. And if you look at the history of Asia, you won't find that strong separation. Even now, things tend to get all kind of mixed up. They never had that problem. And the problem we had in our history as Westerners, as people from European backgrounds, is that you had this huge institution, the Catholic Church and the papacy, and you don't find that in Asia. The closest equivalent you can find is in Tibet, which is basically a theocracy, but the Tibetan theocracy didn't really hold sway anywhere outside of Tibet, and Tibet was a tiny little country. So what you had in the West, in Europe, was the Catholic Church that held sway all across Europe and was almost like a quasi-government, and was able to stifle a lot of things happening that it didn't like or approve of, or that it thought conflicted with its teachings. So, you had the problems of people discovering the earth goes around the sun, and then the Catholic Church coming in and saying, no, you can't say that, but you want the benefits that science brings you. So the way we solved that was by separating church from other forms of understanding the world. So you had science, and you had religion, and you had art, and you had literature, and you had all these things that were all compartmentalized. Now, nobody came along and made an edict and said, from now on, church and state shall be separate. I guess the Americans did when we set up our Constitution, and there's a few examples of that, but it was more of an organic process that had been going on long before that. This didn't happen in Asia. So for the Buddhists, it was fine to incorporate religious stuff to help deal with this, how to make meditation work. And I don't think probably Gautama Buddha saw any problem at all with this, with incorporating things from religions to make it work. It probably never even occurred to him that he was mixing things, because they didn't think of it that way. They just thought, well, knowledge is knowledge, and what works, and we're not going to try to separate knowledge into different areas. So a few of the things that I think undergird, I don't like that word undergird, but I'm going to go with it, the meditation practice in Buddhism. The first thing would be chanting and rituals. Now, when I first started teaching Zen in Santa Monica, California, after being in Japan all those years, I taught a very sort of secular thing, much like what Nishijima Roshi did for different reasons in Japan. And maybe we can go into that later. But we just meditated. We got together, we sat zazen for 30 or 40 minutes, I can't remember what, and then we had a talk, and then we ate lunch and went home. So after a while, I started going to Tassajara and seeing how they did things, and they do a more traditional sort of Zen thing with a ritual and a lot of chanting and a lot of bowing and, all this other stuff. And I started thinking, well, that's interesting. That kind of helps support the practice, and I brought it in. And I got a lot of resistance from the people who came to the Hill Street Center in Santa Monica where I taught at the time. And I think I lost a lot of people. I think the numbers went down and people started freaking out like, oh my God, it's religious, I'm going to go away. But I think these things help because they help underscore how serious meditation is. If you have to do some bowing and some chanting and these kind of rituals and dinging bells and the incense and all that, before you do the meditation practice, it kind of makes you feel like, oh, I'm entering into something special, dare I say it, sacred, that needs to be treated with special care and needs to be respected. And if you take that away, I'm not sure you can get into the kind of proper mindset for what meditation might bring up in your life and in your practice. Another thing is community, sangha as we call it in Buddhism. The community of people who meditate is important because probably for most of you folks out there, probably like me, you didn't know a lot of people who meditated. When I first started doing Zazen, I didn't know anybody else who meditated. It was certainly not something that other people in the punk rock scene did, or friends I knew in school and whatever. They weren't into it. The only place I met other people who meditated was when I got together with our little group. And within that little group, you can kind of discuss things, and you can kind of work and act as a support system for each other, and you just generally become aware that there are other people interested in this stuff, and it feels like we're all doing this together, even though we might not really agree on much else. Like most of the people I knew from meditation groups, pretty much from the beginning to even now, sorry, anybody who gets offended by this, are people I wouldn't really hang out with otherwise. Sorry, everybody. But that's the truth. What we have in common is meditation practice and not much else, which is one of the reasons I get upset when people try to bring politics into it, because I think, if I could only sit with people who I was politically aligned with, I probably wouldn't have sat at all right from the beginning, because they were all weirdos, and they liked the wrong kind of music and all kinds of stuff, and I couldn't really relate to most of them. Most of them I couldn't deal with. but as a community, we're all focused on meditation, so that's a good thing, and that support system helps. But of course it looks like a church, right? And that bugs people, right? So that's a problem for people who want to form a sort of completely secular kind of meditation practice. And the last thing I want to bring up here is philosophy. The philosophy of Buddhism is important to help with the practice, and that's probably the number one thing that bugs people the most, because we tend to think of the ideas of a religion being the religion. So a lot of the ideas of Buddhism might not be compatible with more standard interpretations of Christianity and Islam and Judaism and the Abrahamic religions and other religions that people might belong to when they're trying to do this practice. But I think the philosophy is important, because the philosophy can help you make a cognitive sense of some of the things that happen in your meditation practice. And one sort of bright, shiny example I can give you that some of you who followed me for a long time will be familiar with is I wrote in the book Hardcore Zen about the disastrous final time I did LSD, where I just freaked the F out, and it was really crazy, and it was terrible. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible trip that I can still remember and dredge up terror from even now. But a lot of the things that I encountered during that acid trip, I later encountered in a totally different way through meditation. So, for example, the disillusion of time. And some of you who followed me for a long time have heard me say this before, but I'll say it again. I experienced the disillusion of time while on LSD, where I understood is kind of a funny word, but it became very apparent to me that now was the only real time. Like everything was in the now, which meant I couldn't gauge how long I would be on LSD, and which terrified me, because I could only conceive of the now as time. And later on, through working through meditation, I got much slowlier into that. And I had a framework, this is the important thing, for understanding that through reading Dogen, reading essays like Uji, which is being time, and some of his other essays on time. Shohaku Okumura wrote a really good book about that, and if I remember the title while I make the rest of this video, I'll put a link below. But these kind of things... Oh, no, wait a minute. It was Dainin Katagiri. Oh, it's one of those guys. Anyway, I'll put a link to the proper one below, and you'll see how dumb I am. But anyway, understanding this Buddhist idea of time gave me a framework for dealing with the eternal now, which is sort of my ongoing experience, which I realize when I'm talking to normal people, they don't have that experience of the eternal now, and I'm kind of like, but I am able to hold both, hold the eternal now, along with an understanding that I have a schedule to keep, and I got to be somewhere at 1 o'clock or whatever it is. So there's those three things, and in future videos or essays on the blog or something, I'd like to unpack some of that. I've been thinking a lot about doing one on philosophy, so maybe we'll see that in the future. So just remember, kids, just doing a little bit of mindfulness meditation is probably not so bad, and I feel a little bad for coming down and pounding too hard on that one, but I do feel that still that mindfulness meditation is a kind of Buddhism, and we got to work that out, because being dishonest about it is going to bite us on the ass at some point if we keep being dishonest about it. Anyway, that's a short little video wrap up of things. Hope you had a good Christmas, and hope you'll have a good, happy New Year, and see you later. Bye.